Kaimere is a distant planet. It is defined by waves of life brought from Earth and set free to evolve independently in this new context. The indigenous life of the planet, swarms of microbes called magic by the people who live there, are what harvest Earth organisms and make copies on Kaimere. As the asteroid which concluded the Mesozoic never struck Kaimere, dinosaurs remain the dominant terrestrial megafauna. An excerpt from Harvests and Dynasties of Kaimere, written by Ra Jeheli Apkala, Dr. Adrian Burke, and Dr. Imran Pekan. Around 15 million years ago, Kaimere went up in flames. From the south, the continental plate, which now makes up Picardia and the southern islands, careened north and smashed into the known world. This pushed Arvel's plate up into Nikar, which at the time was the territory of the portal. The subsequent geological wounds exposed the planet's interior in a toxic flood of basalt lava. The push also opened regions connected to these plates to the far north, one of which was directly within the heart of the portal's old territory. This elder god's body was dealt a great wound. Most of its population was slaughtered, burned in a cloud of ash. For many thousands of years, what is now the known world was a wasteland. The whole planet suffered, but flood basalt made the known world particularly harsh, especially in what is modern day called Qajar and the Imperial Lands. Some theorize the fertility of these regions has something to do with how many nutrients were brought to the surface. Composting of enchanted flora going back to when the first children occupied these regions is also at play, though the stage was likely set millions of years prior. It took around 500,000 years for the portal to recover. It is unknown why the god moved south to its current location or how long that process took, but the next harvest was thousands of miles from its old home, at the confluence of Picardia, Nikar, and Arvel, where it has remained to this day. The known world had begun to recover, with many small generalists enjoying a host of adaptive radiations, interrupted by a few reclusive giants from faraway habitats, spared the worst of the devastation. As the god could feel this was a shadow of the region's ecological potential, especially with the nutrients now deposited everywhere, an overgrown bed of weeds, rather than a thriving garden it was used to, the god began to tend to its home once more. The first harvest collected from North America's western coastline and as much as 1,000 miles inland. Within this location, the portal was able to gather flora and fauna from most of the regions in its new territory. Prairies, forests, highlands, deserts, freshwater, and coastal areas spanning from the tropics to cool temperate regions. Just as it had on Earth, the fossil record of Kaimere is fragmentary, increasingly so the further back in time you go. Although fossil hunting expeditions are expensive and dangerous, the Great Library has been fielding them for thousands of years. Their number of annual fossil collections is much less frequent than our own, perhaps only a few digs a year, but a much longer timeline has meant that they have amassed a formidable collection that contributes to a very comprehensive understanding, especially of the formations in the aftermath of the Dynastic Extinction. Collaboration with human paleontologists, especially within the past century as our understanding of our planet's history has caught up with their understanding of their own, has furthered this understanding. This was the first great influx of flowering plants and grass to Kaimere. Although the late Cretaceous and Oligocene harvest both contributed such flora, gymnosperms still dominated many habitats planet-wide. It certainly wasn't a clean slate, but the former ecological instability was present enough that angiosperms got their proverbial foot in the door and ended up dominating a lot of habitats, at least in the known world. The success of familiar flora was a benefit to some of the incoming herbivores. Earth's Middle Miocene was part of an ongoing transition from a warmer to cooler planet, reflecting fewer forests and more open grasslands. Kaimere at the time was warmer than Earth, which is why tropical and temperate fauna fared better, and those from forests had an advantage over their counterparts out on the prairie, since most of Kaimere was densely forested at this time. Many of the animals harvested perished due to disease, local competition, insufficient population, or lack of sufficient habitat, but overall, the subsequent 500,000 years saw mammals in the harvest make up a majority of large fauna. The largest herbivores at this time were the gomphotheres. The exact timeline of proboscidean invasion in North America is unknown, but it is assumed that these forest gomphotheres were pioneers of the clade. Coming to Kaimere, a land without much competition, and spreading fast and far with no different from their journey from Asia to North America back on Earth. They were not only the heaviest mammals in the known world at the time, they were extremely abundant. Nikar was especially kind to them, and they became the most common large mammal quite quickly. On Earth, North American calicotheres of the genus Meropus were struggling as their forested habitat shifted to grassland. Kaimere provided a sanctuary of sorts, a second chance. While Meropus went extinct shortly after this harvest, ending the lineage in North America, the genus absolutely thrived in Kaimere. They had been replicated in the forests of both Arvel and Nikar, where they spent a long time apart. In Nikar they were common, but Arvel proved to be their domain. Within 500,000 years, they outclassed gomphotheres in size, using their great size and strength to cultivate the forest to their liking, as the titans before them had done. The schizotherian genus Titanomeropus came from this lineage and absolutely thrived in Arvel. Several rhinoceros species were also harvested megafauna. Forests were their main home. They didn't reach the size or abundance of gomphotheres and calicotheres, but they were undoubtedly successful. Nikar had more open terrain, especially in the northern range of the Portal's territory, although southern Arvel had its share of open space. In these prairies of both continents, the great camel Apicamelus rapidly increased in size and population. The Nikari camels were especially successful and spread far and wide, even to Kairul. Housie grass was eons away, and while there were plenty of successful grasslands for this camel to inhabit, most of its territory was actually a mosaic habitat with lots of forests scattered throughout. Smaller camels and horses rounded out the mid-range herbivore niches. These were especially common in open habitats. This harvest also brought its share of predators. Barborophilids, Machairodont saber-toothed cats, smaller canids, and the bone-crushing hound Epicyon were all present and formidable threats. The apex predator of North America at the time was a species of Amphicyon. These half-ton ambush predators thrived in the forests of Kaimere. Competition and ample large game pushed them to their greatest physical potential, and a species called Amphicyon dirus of the later Warren Clades period is widely regarded as being the largest strict carnivore terrestrial mammal of Earth or Kaimere, weighing well over a ton. The coastal waters of the known world also had ample niches available. Marine volcanic activity decimated the seas and shores. Some marine reptiles and sharks had returned, but they were still a great deal of instability. The Oligocene harvest had brought a few marine mammals, but since the waters of this situation were much less impacted than that harvest, they didn't have any notable legacies, whereas this comparatively clean slate left many openings for marine mammals to thrive in ways they couldn't in the Oligocene. Aside from a few small sharks and other fish, the niche of filter feeders was notably absent. Cetothere and rorqual whales quickly erupted in population, gorging themselves on tiny shrimp and bait fish thriving in these nutrient-rich waters. Cetaceans proved far more successful as their more versatile feeding methods proved better when taking advantage of a wider prey base. Rorquals lacked the concentrations of food which give them an advantage in Earth's colder waters toward the poles. They still did well enough, but never reached notable diversity or size, whereas several living cetacean species and families can trace their origins to this harvest, with such diversity as the benthic bilyuk, surface-skimming bilgetu, and ram-feeding common whale that also dabbles in the methods of the other two. Toothed whales also partook in this glut of small game. Eurinodelphines, long-snouted whales similar to dolphins, were quite abundant. This came as a bit of a surprise to assembly paleontologists, as the clade isn't known from the Pacific. Either their range was further than currently known, not implausible considering North and South America weren't yet connected, and the fossil record is far from complete, or the harvest's range was further than previously thought, at least in the water. While these small cetaceans only have one living descendant, a rare benthic feeder in the inland sea called the ogul, for several million years they were one of the most abundant and diverse small fish specialists in this era, until mosasaurs and dolphins combined to outcompete them during the final stages of the inland sea as primarily seagrass meadows 8 million years ago. Fossils of Proneotherium and several other basal walruses have been dated to this harvest. They wouldn't really come into their own until the inland sea became more shallow millions of years later. The fish hunters of this clade faced competition from plotopterids, giant marine darters on their last leg on Earth, but a boon of success for a few million years in Kaimere before the consolidation of the inland sea favored pinnipeds. Kaimere's first Sirenians, along with the first Desmostilians, grazed on the abundant seagrass. Seagrass grazers weren't new to Kaimere, and the meadows wouldn't reach their current range or abundance for another 5 million years, but these two clades still respectively thrived in their own little ways. Being able to rest on islands safe from marine predators gave Desmostilians a significant advantage, although Sirenians quickly had a greater range as they were much more capable swimmers. Unsurprisingly, this new abundance of potential prey both supported harvested predators and drew in new ones. A 5-meter macroraptorial whale, very similar to Acrophyseter, specialized in their fellow cetaceans. A massive cousin of river dolphins, Squalodon, was one of the many animals of this harvest which were taken just before extinction on Earth, but thrived in this new second chance context. In fact, amidst competition and bountiful prey, Squalodon carnosicarum became the last and largest species of this genus at 9 meters long. They were generalist predators and hunted small cetaceans, walruses, desmostilians, sirenians, and anything else they could catch. For over 1 million years, they were the most common large predator in these coastal waters. They were not, however, the top predators. Even as a cast of mosasaurs, large fish, and sharks returned to the area, none were as large as this giant Squalodon. However, all were on the menu of the new apex predators that had just come from Earth's oceans. Otodus megalodon. This enormous shark would find its greatest potential here in Kaimere. These highly productive seas had nothing approaching its 15 to 20 meter size. All other creatures were on the menu, and it reaped the bounties of these highly productive seas without counter or mercy. Throughout the Warren Clades period, a time of great ecological conflict on land, Megalodon enjoyed an unmatched dominion of the sea. It was not until later Miocene harvests that the cetaceans would present their contender for this niche, followed by a contestant from the mosasaurs, which continued to rule the seas to this day. Megalodon is still a largest marine predator, but during this era they achieved their greatest population and greatest size. On land, the dominion of Miocene-harvested fauna was not to last. Although initially the size of incoming mammals kept the dinosaurs that survived the extinction small, many started to close the gap. The skelosaurs and Nicar and elasmarians of Arvel had gone from the size of a small dog during the extinction event to the size of a pony by the time of the harvest, and many produced larger taxa amidst competition with gomphotheres, chalicotheres, and camels. There were a few very small sauropods in Arvel which survived, though these remained under a few tons until the arrival of Kiporotitan from Kyrule a few million years later, at which time these little sauropods would be pushed to distant fringes and highland habitats. Eudromaeosaurs were the first predatory theropods to be successful. They weren't of the cursorial cockatrices which now make up the most abundant mesopredators of the known world, being much more basal ambush predators, and they had to avoid being prey themselves from the much larger and more powerful mammal invaders. They persisted as small predators, as they had in the Tyrant dynasty, but most remained very small. Megaraptorans of modern Kaimere present a bit of a taxonomic anomaly. While it is assumed that these mid-range theropods common in Arvel were their ancestors, making them descendants of animals like Megaraptor and Australovenator, these animals on this continent during the Tyrant dynasty appear to have been among the casualties of the Dynastic Extinction. Two clades of very small predators between 2 and 4 meters long and weighing less than 100 kilograms have been discovered both before and after the extinction in Arvel, presumably ancestral to the two modern Megaraptoran clades, Steraconychidae and Eperovenaturidae, also referred to as basal Megaraptorans and robust monarchs, respectively. Some consider these to be very basal Megaraptorans or even basal Tyrannosauroids, perhaps analogous to Dilung and Eotyrannus. Whatever their cladistics, these two clades of tiny predators grew larger. Steraconychidae were the first to grow massive. It wasn't long until their lineage went from a few hundred pounds to 2 tons. Arveloraptor, largest genus of this clade, reached 35 feet and 4 tons within a few million years of harvest, and suddenly the gomphotheres and giant chalicotheres had more to worry about than Amphicyon, which was pushed to the extreme limits of terrestrial mammal predators and still left in Arveloraptor's shadow. The dynamic nature of these clades, all booming in population, resulted in great fluctuation in regional populations. Another small harvest was triggered from South America to support the expansive rainforests, but for the most part, competition and productivity was so extreme that there wasn't need for a harvest until the Titanosaurs arrived 12 million years ago. Their transformation of the floral landscape was substantial, especially coupled with the continued rotation of Arvel, and the known world would begin to take on an overall condition similar to what modern Chimerans would recognize as their home, at least in broad strokes. A new caste of mammals would be introduced and more dinosaur clades arose to dominance. The brief reign of Miocene North American mammals had come to an end, and many of these great acons, like Amphicyon, great chalicotheres, and giant forest gomphotheres, went extinct within the known world. The rotation of Arvel, coupled with the placement of its mountains resulting in a section of a once continental forest, became isolated by a great desert. This forest, kept alive by annual monsoons and isolated from the rest of Kaimere by 1,000-mile desert, is mostly populated by relics of this first harvest. Over the next 2 weeks, we will meet the Hugeldun, last of the forest-dwelling giant chalicotheres, and the other residents of this isolated forest. Until next time, stay fantastic, everyone. Cheers, folks!